Ilara Vance knew the language of the earth better than she knew the idle chatter of a cocktail party. Her hands, clean but with soil ingrained in the fine lines of her knuckles, were a testament to a life spent coaxing life from the dirt. They were the hands that had built Viridian Farms from a neglected 5-acre plot in upstate New York into the most sought-after purveyor of organic, heirloom vegetables on the East Coast. Michelin-starred chefs in Manhattan put her name on their menus as a mark of quality. Her days started before sunrise and ended long after sunset, a rhythm dictated by seasons and seedlings, not stock markets and social calendars. She'd earned her degree in agronomy on a scholarship, her thesis on closed-loop water systems and sustainable farming winning national acclaim. But before that, she was just a girl from a family of Californian farmhands whose parents had followed the harvests, their dreams as fragile as the peach blossoms in spring. Ilara had vowed to put down roots, not just for her plants, but for herself. And she had. At 34, she wasn't just a farmer. She was a scientist, an entrepreneur, and the quiet, beating heart of a food revolution. This reputation was what brought her to the pristine, marble-floored foyer of the Covington estate in the exclusive enclave of Greenwich, Connecticut. She was here to finalize the produce delivery for the annual Covington Foundation Charity Gala, the social event of the season. Her worn but sturdy leather boots felt sacrilegious on the polished Italian marble, and her practical canvas jacket was a stark contrast to the gilded frames of ancestral portraits lining the walls. And then she met the queen of this gilded cage, Beatrice Covington. Beatrice was a woman who had been born on third base and was convinced she'd hit a triple. Her wealth was old, inherited from her husband's banking dynasty, and she wore it like a suit of armor. Her life was a meticulously curated collection of expensive things, influential friends, and charitable events that were more about reinforcing social hierarchies than actual charity. She hadn't done a day of manual labor in her life, and she viewed anyone who had with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Her obsession was with provenance of her wine, her art, her jewelry, and most importantly, of the people she associated with. The event planner, a harried but competent woman named Cassandra, made the introductions. Mrs. Covington, this is Ilara Vance. She's the owner of Viridian Farms, the agriculturalist I told you about. She'll be supplying all the produce for the gala. Beatrice's perfectly plucked eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, performed a swift, dismissive scan of Ilara, lingering on her sun-weathered cheeks and the simple, functional way she tied back her dark hair. There was no designer handbag, no statement jewelry, just an aura of quiet capability that Beatrice seemed to find offensive. This is her. Beatrice's voice was light and airy but carried a distinct chill. The farmer. The pause was infinitesimal, but it was packed with a universe of disdain. Ilara offered a polite, firm handshake, which Beatrice accepted with two reluctant, manicured fingers. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Covington. Cassandra and I have worked out a spectacular selection for your menu. The first harvest of summer gem lettuces, candy-striped beets, and sun-gold tomatoes that taste like pure sunshine. Ilara's passion was genuine, her voice warm with the pride of her work. Beatrice was unmoved. Yes, well, Cassandra assured me your products were acceptable. Frankly, I was in favor of flying in the produce from Runge's market in Paris for authenticity. Our guests have certain standards, you understand. They expect the best. They'll get the best, Ilara replied calmly, refusing to be baited. Fresher than anything you could fly in. Everything will be harvested less than 24 hours before it reaches the kitchens. We shall see, Beatrice sniffed, already turning away as if the conversation was over. Just ensure your delivery people use the service entrance at the back. And that everything is clean. We can't have dirt in a $5,000 a plate gala. Without another glance, she glided away, leaving Ilara standing on the marble floor, a silent promise of confrontation hanging in the opulent air. The night of the gala was a spectacle of calculated extravagance. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto a sea of designer gowns and bespoke tuxedos. The air hummed with the clinking of champagne flutes and the murmur of conversations about stocks, yachts, and summering in the Hamptons. Ilara, in a simple but elegant black sheath dress, felt more like an anthropologist than a guest. The head chef, a celebrated culinary artist named Antoine Dubois, had personally insisted she attend. Ilara, your produce is the soul of my menu tonight, he'd said, his French accent thick with sincerity. I want to thank you properly. You are not a supplier, you are a collaborator. For the first hour she remained on the periphery, observing the glittering ecosystem. She spoke with Cassandra, the event planner, and a few guests who were genuinely interested in her farm. A prominent food critic had cornered her by the raw bar, grilling her enthusiastically about her soil composition. It was all pleasantly civilized. And then, the first course was served, a delicate tower of Viridian Farms candy-striped beets, gem lettuces, and edible flowers drizzled with a champagne vinaigrette. A hush of genuine appreciation fell over the tables, followed by a chorus of praise. It was Senator Whitmore, a man whose political influence was matched only by his girth, who boomed the fateful compliment. "Beatrice, my dear. This salad is a revelation. Utterly divine. Where did you find these vegetables? They taste of life itself." Beatrice, seated at the head table, beamed as if she had personally tilled the soil. "Only the best for my guests, Senator." Her eyes scanned the room, preening under the praise. And then they landed on Alara, who was standing near the terrace, smiling faintly at the compliments she could overhear. For Beatrice, seeing the object of her earlier disdain receiving silent credit was an intolerable offense. This was her party. Her success. She would not share the spotlight with the hired help. She rose from her seat with a predatory grace, her diamond necklace flashing. The room quieted slightly as she began to move, sensing a shift in the evening's program pleasantries. She glided over to where Alara stood with Cassandra. "Speaking of the produce," Beatrice announced, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom, "it seems we have a misunderstanding. The farmer herself has apparently mistaken an invitation to the service entrance for a seat at the ball." A wave of confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. All eyes turned to Alara. The heat of 100 stares felt more intense than the midday sun in her fields. "Mrs. Covington, I think," Cassandra started, her face paling. Beatrice cut her off with a flick of her wrist. "You think? No, dear, you don't. You simply find these quaint little projects, these rustic charities." She turned the full force of her scorn on Alara. "Tell me," she said, circling Alara like a shark, "did you think that by putting on a dress you could shed the dirt? We are trying to enjoy a sophisticated evening, and frankly your presence is provincial." Alara stood her ground, her heart hammering against her ribs. She kept her voice even, professional. "Mrs. Covington, I am a guest of Chef Antoine. I believe there has been a mistake. The only mistake was thinking someone of your background could conduct herself with the appropriate decorum." Beatrice spat, her voice dripping with venom. The mask of polite society had vanished, revealing the raw, ugly snobbery beneath. "You are a farmhand. A laborer. People like you grow the food, you don't dine with the people who eat it. You belong in the fields, not the ballroom. Did you really think you could fool anyone here into believing you are one of us?" The humiliation was a physical blow. Alara could feel the stares of everyone in the room, their pity, their morbid curiosity, their silent agreement. No one spoke up. They were Beatrice's guests, members of her world, a world with unspoken rules about who belonged and who did not. She was an outsider, being publicly excised. "Your work, what you do with your hands, it's quaint," Beatrice continued, delivering the final, crushing blow. "But it's also dirty. And I can't abide dirt at my party. You reek of soil and effort, my dear. It's a stench of the lower class that never quite washes off." She finished with a dismissive wave. "Now please leave. You are embarrassing yourself, and more importantly, you are embarrassing me." Isolated and utterly humiliated, Alara stood frozen in a bubble of suffocating silence. Her dignity was in tatters, her professional pride dragged through the mud on the floor of a billionaire's ballroom. She opened her mouth to speak, to defend the value of her work, the honor of her heritage, but no words came out. For the first time in her life, Alara Vance, the woman who could command the earth to bear fruit, was speechless. Into the chasm of mortifying silence strode a figure of unimpeachable authority. The double doors to the kitchen swung open, and Chef Antoine Dubois emerged, a towering presence in his crisp white chef's jacket. He was not wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing his uniform, a symbol of the craft and meritocracy that Beatrice Covington so fundamentally misunderstood. His face, usually animated with culinary passion, was set like stone. He had clearly heard everything. The crowd parted for him as if by instinct. He walked directly past Beatrice, not even affording her a glance, and stopped in front of Alara. He placed a gentle, reassuring hand on her arm, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. In the silent, watching ballroom, it was an act of coronation. "Alara," he said, his voice calm but resonant, cutting through the thick, tense air. "Forgive this interruption. I was delayed in the kitchen." He then turned, his gaze finally falling upon Beatrice Covington. It was not a gaze of anger, but something far more damning, professional contempt. "Mrs. Covington," he began, and every guest leaned in to listen. "You are the host of this event and I am the chef. My name and my reputation are on every plate served in this room tonight. Therefore, I believe I have the right to speak." Beatrice, flustered by this unexpected challenge, could only stammer, "Chef, this is a private matter." "Non," he cut her off, the single French word sharper than any of his knives. "It is a professional matter. You have just insulted the single most important person to the success of this meal. You have insulted my guest of honor." A collective gasp went through the room. "Guest of honor? You call her a farmhand as if it is an insult," Chef Antoine continued, his voice rising with controlled power. "You mock her for smelling of the soil. Madam, you are mistaken. She does not smell of dirt. She smells of terroir, of authenticity. It is the scent of the very life your guests praised on their plates not 10 minutes ago. It is a scent of integrity, something that cannot be bought or inherited." He took a step closer to Beatrice, who for the first time in her life seemed to be shrinking. "You believe excellence is flown in from Paris in a refrigerated box. You are wrong. Excellence is cultivated with knowledge, with passion, with tireless effort. Excellence is standing right here." He turned back to face the room, his arm still lightly holding Ilara's. "This is not just a farmer. This is Ilara Vance. Perhaps the name means nothing to you people, but in my world, the world of actual quality, it is legendary." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Miss Vance's techniques in regenerative agriculture and soil science are studied at universities in Kyoto and Wageningen. The French Ministry of Agriculture flew her to province last spring to consult on saving a heritage varietal of tomato from a blight. I have spent the last 2 years personally trying to convince her to oversee the agricultural programs for my entire European restaurant group. She is, without exaggeration, one of the most important minds in sustainable agriculture in the world today." The silence that followed was one of pure, unadulterated shock. The faces of the guests morphed from detached pity for Ilara to dawning horror at Beatrice's monumental blunder. The food critic was now staring at Ilara with undisguised awe. Senator Whitmore looked as if he might choke on his wine. Chef Antoine delivered the final, devastating blow, his voice ringing with conviction. "So you see, Mrs. Covington, Mademoiselle Vance does not need to be at your party. My menu, my reputation, and the very meal you are serving your guests needed her. The mistake tonight was not her presence. It was your ignorance." The reversal was absolute and instantaneous. Ilara was no longer the humiliated outsider. She was the distinguished wronged expert. And Beatrice Covington, the queen of this social stage, was suddenly exposed as nothing more than an arrogant, uniformed fool. In her own ballroom, surrounded by her own people, she was the one who was now isolated, shamed, and utterly, speechlessly alone. The chef's words hung in the air, demolishing the ballroom's social structure as effectively as a wrecking ball. The shame that had been forced upon Ilara moments before now recoiled onto its source. Beatrice Covington stood, pale and trembling, her face a mask of disbelief and horror. The whispers that followed were not of sympathy for her, but of shock at her gaffe. She had not punched down. She had tried to sweat a giant. Without another word, she turned and fled the room, her hurried exit a far greater spectacle of embarrassment than anything she had tried to inflict on Ilara. In her wake, the atmosphere of the room transformed. The frozen tableau of guests melted into motion, and a new gravity took hold with Ilara as its sun. Senator Whitmore, his face flushed with eagerness, was the first to approach. "Miss Vance. A remarkable story. Truly remarkable. We're trying to pass some agricultural subsidies in the Senate. I'd be fascinated to hear your perspective." A woman dripping in emeralds, who owned a vast estate in Virginia horse country, pushed in to ask about soil regeneration. The food critic was asking for an exclusive interview. They swarmed her, their hands outstretched, their voices filled with the fawning respect they had reserved for Beatrice just an hour before. Ilara handled the onslaught with a calm, centered grace. She was polite but reserved, accepting business cards with a simple nod. Her vindication wasn't in their sudden approval, but in the quiet, unwavering support of the man who still stood beside her. Once the initial wave of adulation subsided, Chef Antoine steered her toward the relative quiet of the terrace. The cool night air was a balm. "I am sorry you had to endure that, Ilara," he said, his voice now gentle. Her brand of arrogance is a poison. You didn't have to do that, Alara said, her gratitude immense. You put yourself in the middle of it. He let out a short, dry laugh. They are my clients, yes. But you are my inspiration. Without your work, my art is just ingredients. You are the source. He looked at her, his expression serious. My offer, the one to consult in Europe. I want to amend it. What I said in there was not just for show. I don't want a consultant. I want a partner. Let's build a new model from farm to 5 stars. Your science, my kitchens. We could change everything. It was an offer that transcended business. It was a recognition of her true worth, a key to a future she had only dared to dream of. It was an opportunity born not from networking or social climbing, but from the integrity of her work. The next morning, the story of Beatrice Covington's catastrophic gala was the talk of the town. Her husband, a pragmatic man who understood the cost of bad press, issued a formal public apology to Miss Vance on behalf of his family and their foundation, along with a sizable donation to a sustainable farming initiative of her choice. But for Beatrice, the damage was done. She had built her identity on being the arbiter of class and taste, and she had been publicly exposed as having neither. Alara didn't read the articles. She was already back at Viridian Farms, walking the fields as the sun rose, casting a golden glow over the rows of sleeping lettuce. She knelt, plunging her hands into the rich, dark earth. Felt like coming home. This was her truth, her power. The memory of the humiliation was a faint echo, drowned out by the rustle of leaves and the promise of the coming harvest. The ballroom, the diamonds, the scorn, they were a world away, a noisy dream. Here, in the quiet dignity of her life's work, was reality. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a formal written offer from Chef Antoine's group, detailing a partnership that would give her creative and scientific control over a new transatlantic agricultural enterprise. She smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. She had never needed the approval of Beatrice's world. She had only needed to be true to her own. The world, it turned out, was starting to catch on. Character and effort, she thought, looking out at the empire she had built from a single seed, were the only things that ever truly took root.